Need to hold on, pause. Well, welcome back, everybody. Today's Tuesday. We're getting through yet another day of all of this, and we're in the second part of our six-part series called One-on-One Conversations with Harness You. And I just want to reiterate, we're doing these one-on-ones because it just seemed like the right time to really have some really meaningful discussions with some people that I think are really doing some amazing things, working at the intersection of tech and faith and community and well-being, and the list goes on. But today what we've got is somebody very near and dear to my heart, and that's Monte McClain. Monte's the pastor of College Avenue Presbyterian Church, and even though I was raised Catholic, I am a member of this church. So full disclosure, I am not objective here. But the thing that I loved about it is the minute I walked into the church, I just felt like I was home. And then I watched Monte go through some of the things that he offered over the weekend, like the homeless dinner on Friday nights, and the Thanksgiving dinner that we do every year. And Monte just gets it. And he gets it in a real and profound way. And so, Monte, no pressure here. But, you get community in a really amazing way. So I'm just going to dig in and say, can you define your definition of community to us and why it's so important that you focus on that?
So I hope thanks for having me, and I hope it works okay. My Wi-Fi is a little slow, so
No
sorry about that.
worries.
I think community for me is really experience what I've experienced in my life here in America and around the world in different countries. I always like to go back to the words and what the words mean in my training as pastor, and so the word community comes from the Latin, and com means together or with. And munus or immunity, it comes from a word that means to defend or to work together on a project or to be together working. And so it's working together on a common goal to take care of each other. And it's really what community is about, I think, in that that's what it is, working towards a common goal. You don't have to have all the same values. You don't have to have all the same faith backgrounds, at least in my context, it's different faith traditions, and you don't have to be Christian or Presbyterian to work towards something like responding to hunger. It's the shared value, and then in that is really the richness of recognizing our humanity, that we might not have the same perspectives, but we do actually have the same essence or image of God is what I'd call it. That same thing at the root of who we to be human.
Well, that doesn't get more profound than that. And one of the things that I love what you're doing is, you just talked about it, and that's feeding the hunger. You do this not only at our church, but you do this in the community as well. So can you talk a little bit more about feeding the hunger in your community?
Sure. So,
Or in the community, sorry.
So our church, we do a meal on Friday nights. We've done it for almost 40 years. And one of the things we've discovered in the past 10 years really is that taking ownership, I think, through community, recognizing that the people we are feeding who would come to eat, they form a community, but there's also a community of people that want to feed, that want to act, that want to participate and advance the common good of our city of Oakland. And so it's really responding to the hungers of Oakland, plural, because people are hungry for food. They're also hungry for a chance to be together, for socialization, for relationship, and they're hungry for a chance to give back. Oftentimes in a big society and city, and with technology thrown in, it's hard to know what you can do yourself, or it's easy to feel really alone. One of the striking things is that Vivek Murthy, who was the Surgeon General underneath President Obama, he recognized that isolation was the main, probably driving public health problem that was underneath the growing opioid epidemic, other addictions, depression, suicide, and even diabetes and obesity is really isolation. And that's the number one public health problem we're facing, which is not ironic, but consistent, even with what we're in the midst of COVID-19. And so it is really responding to people feeling isolated, disempowered, um, unconnected to other people, maybe even disconnected to their own body.
Mhm.
And that's really what it's about, I think. And so it's community with other people, but with the city, and then also even with yourself, knowing who you are and what you can offer, and that sometimes giving is also receiving, and that you find yourself by losing yourself and being involved in something bigger than who you are.
Well, it was interesting because yesterday I was talking to Robert McPhee about visions and values and what's important. And right now, because we're all sheltering in place, it's so important to reach out. I know I've been on the phone and texting, and I've got a couple of friends of mine working in the medical profession, and I'm just leaving a phone call every day saying, I don't know if you hear this or not, but God, I love you for doing what you're doing. Thank you for giving it your all. Thank you for being at the front lines. It's funny, those two little words, they have such power, and I think they can be used for good. And one of the things that I noticed having served at those Friday night meetings, that at the beginning I used to stay in the kitchen because I thought that's, we'd let them eat and I would stay in the kitchen. And then you said a while ago that, come and sit down, just have a meal with them. And it was such a simple sentence, but it had such a profound effect, because when you sit down with folks and you have a conversation, you realize you're not so far apart,
Right.
and you can humanize this person, in a way that, using the word houseless or homeless, it doesn't fit them. They're human beings. They're just like all the rest of us. And I'm so glad you said that to us in church one day, because it literally made all the difference to how I view the Friday night dinners, and realizing that not only are we providing fuel for the soul, or for the stomachs, but we're also providing fuel for the soul. And the person that's receiving it and the person that gives it, it's an equal relationship, because we literally both get something out of it. I know when I go home on Friday nights, yeah, I'm tired after standing on my feet for 2 hours after the end of a work day, but man, I just feel so much more connected when I do something like that. And can you talk a little bit more about some of the other programs that the church is doing, because there's some pretty amazing stuff that you guys are working on.
Sure. Well, so some is doing holiday meals. Some of it's trying to work with people in the neighborhood. We're working with some people in Guatemala, in the town of Palin, Guatemala. We encountered them through relationship with a Guatemalan who's a pastor here in Oakland.
Hmm.
It's his hometown, and kind of just being open to relationships and encounters. Met up with this coffee cooperative of indigenous Mayans who live in that town, who've been selling coffee and never made a profit and looking for help. And so it's a way to work with them and help import their coffee, and more than fair trade and equitable trade. But then also it's led to working with street kids in the town, teaching them skills, empowering them to be on their own. And then working with folks that are doing medical care for people that have no medical care at all. And so it's not trying to solve their problems, but work with them and listen to them in the encounter, and then see how we can partner together. And I think everything, trying to do that, the services, our gatherings. I try to be involved in civic work within the city, and in our merchant association, things like that, just being present and encountering folks and being willing to exchange and learn to participate. There's a man named Martin Buber who he was a philosopher and great Jewish thinker who died in the 60s, but he mostly was working about a century ago. And he's famous for a notion about I and thou. And in his writings, he says that all of life is an encounter, and that everything is about that. Life is an encounter, and that he talks about relationships as an I and a thou, which is kind of dated in our language. But what he means is that you have to have a subject and a subject,
Hmm.
that you have to treat the other person in front of you as a subject, not an object,
Hmm.
not as a resource, but as a subject. And that when you have that real relationship, which is an I and a thou, um, that's encounter, and that things happen that you can't imagine. He describes it as like a sacred, or even the sacred. That's what God is in that moment. And there really is, I see that in my own life and experiences, and then trying to help midwife that in other people and in encounters between people, is being present, I guess, for that encounter, trying to come as a subject where you're listening and learning as much as you might share and give. And that if we can stay in that moment and develop relationships like that, which can't always be that way, but we have to try, that in that encounter, we change the world, but we're changed just as much. And there's the birthing of those opportunities, like you're talking about on Friday nights, sitting down with someone, treating someone who's usually treated as an object, as
Mm-hmm.
a subject, maybe even learning from them. Same way as the work with our friends in Guatemala, who it's not us going down there to be white saviors to save them or help them, but really to learn with them and from them, and to live together. And it's a challenge. It's a challenge to be that way in our society, which is really based on individuality, and kind of transactions. What can you get from this person or this situation? Or
Mm-hmm.
it's changing that, letting go of that, which is a hard thing to do. But it's
Well,
kind of the underneath all the things we're trying to do in and around the church.
having been lucky enough to go on one of those trips myself, I will honestly say, when Carl said, "Would you like to go?" I kind of hesitated for a minute because, first of all, Guatemala was nowhere on my bucket list. I had never gone on a church trip before. I had just quit my job, and I was like, "Well, I really need a vacation. I want to get the heck out of Dodge," And okay, let's do it. But what I what I gained from that trip was priceless. You know, being being a non-speaking Spanish person down in Guatemala, I realized how kind people were. And I'm going to give one funny thing because I went on Google to try to figure out how to say my name is in Spanish, and somehow Google came up with my number is. So the whole time I'm down there, I'm introducing myself as mi nombre es Janet, and they're just nodding their head very politely. And then I get back home and I realize, oh great, all week long I've been saying my number is, and nobody corrected me. They just figured, okay, she's trying,
Yeah.
and and yet they I was amazed by the spirit of that community. I mean, they're so gracious and kind, and they just went out of their way to make us feel home or at home. And well, we literally stayed at somebody's home. And what I got out of that trip, man, I just remember coming back going, what do I want to do? I wrote it down literally the day after we landed. I wrote down, what do I want to do? And well, you know this, I've shared this with you. When I wrote down, I want to help people, I knew it wasn't just me writing that down. There was something else helping me write that down. And I don't say that to lightly because it was just that profound of a moment for me. And really it was this trip that you guys allowed me to, you shared with me, that helped me launch Harness You. And I will always be forever grateful for that trip. And why don't you talk about some of the people there, because they're just such amazing folks. There's so many of them to pick from. How about let's start with the kids, because the kids are amazing. The street kids were considered kind of the shadows of the group for a long time, and yet somehow, you know, all of you who are working on this project found a way to connect the street kids with the cooperative, and the amazing story of where that led to, because it really is an amazing story.
Sure. Well, I think it all goes back to encounter, that all life is
Mhm.
encounter. And it really came from, we also had other people that were there that don't look like me, a middle-aged white guy, who were able to maybe connect more with younger folks, and actually just encountering kids sitting on the street. There's not a lot to do. So people are just sitting around, maybe 7 guys sharing one skateboard. And
Mhm.
so these 2 guys in particular just started hanging out and encountering people and talking with them. And And they are, one of them is a big sports guy. The other guy is a big photographer.
Mhm.
They both really like hip hop. And so those connections came out because naturally those kids also like those things. And so through that, they started helping them learn photography, digital
Mhm.
video making, making videos of skating and BMXing and rapping and music. And I mean, it led to in that encounter, realizing those kids had a lot to offer.
Yes, they did.
Even if we thought that, helping them to realize they had a lot to offer, and even realizing that, discovering that some of those kids actually were raising themselves, from families where there wasn't enough food or money
Yeah.
to feed all the kids. And so they were just kind of on their own. And
Right.
about 4 or 5 of them lived together in a house without a water. But that's where they were. And through that encounter, they came to where they helped them have cameras and video cameras and even get good skateboards, donations from up here. And they were able to use those to help make things happen on their own and teach other people how to use them. And I mean, so it ended up being from these 2 American guys hanging out with kids on the street corner, where we had this citywide BMX, uh, rap, skateboard, huge festival in the middle of the street that
Mhm.
the whole city came to, that was on
Yes, I
radio.
remember that.
The next day, there was a conversation with political representatives of the city coming to listen to the youth voice. And then even working with our coffee friends, who most of them, they thought of, these kids are the riffraff. They're the ones that cause the trouble. They're the ones that get their daughters pregnant. Um, their kids should stay away from. And yet somehow or another, through all our mutual encountering, then it's blossomed that the people in the coffee cooperative, who are older and more conservative in terms of values and how they live and suspicious of streets, they're actually partnering together. And these street kids help them paint and renovate the coffee cooperative so that they can
Mhm.
open a cafe space. And now that
Mhm.
cafe space, then the coffee guys let these younger guys host rap parties there and
Mhm.
opportunities. There's been some sexual education there about um, and things like that, and staying safe. And so it's just really this thing that I actually didn't think it could ever happen when some of the folks were trying to work on that and see if that could be birthed. And it's amazing that this life came out of this encounter where people treated each other and came to a place where they started to see each other as mutual subjects, and then discovering what could come from all of that.
Mhm.
It's just really amazing, um, all around us, not just there, but here too.
Well, I think my favorite story is, and I've seen it in pictures, is right by the coffee cooperative. You know, these folks have opened up their own coffee shop. And for those that aren't familiar with Guatemala, um, most of the natives don't get to drink their own coffee. We're drinking this stuff called Nescafe, and coffee is not actually a word I would use to describe Nescafe, but it was the closest thing that I could come to it. So the thing that I just was so amazed about is that now everybody in the community gets to taste what they grow, and the sense of ownership and pride over that. I mean, just the pictures that I've seen so far, it's it's pretty amazing.
Yeah. Well, and then it goes even bigger because then it creates jobs for people in the cafe, and
Mhm.
they're teaching other people how to be baristas. And now there's a second cafe that someone else opened in the town, and so it really is through that encounter, it just kind of paid forward, or it kind of comes to life, and is a instead of a downward spiral, it's like a positive upward
Mm.
cyclone that creates more life.
Well, and not only that, you guys are doing ESL lessons up here, but then to the folks that are up here, but then you've really taken it one step further. And I would love for you to see if you could share what you're doing up here and then what you've just started instituting down for some of the kids in Guatemala.
Sure, yeah. So my friend Pablo, who's the pastor in Oakland
Hmm.
from Guatemala, his church, Primera Iglesia Presbyteriana here in Oakland, it's pretty much all Central Americans. Most of them are, I mean, all of them are immigrants, lots of refugees. And so they do ESL classes during the week because people feel safe coming to the church. They might not feel safe going anywhere else. And so people from our church go over, and we help on Monday nights with that, working with them and trying to provide conversational practice in English for these folks who most of them dropped out of school in first or second grade, which is just
Mhm.
how it is in Central America. And but so learning a little conversational English helps them improve their life. They can be the person on the crew of house cleaners or on the construction crew who can speak English to
Mhm.
the boss and maybe move ahead
Mhm.
that way. And so working on, and then while we were down in Guatemala, it turns out next to the cafe and the coffee cooperative, this
Mhm.
ESL school that a
Mhm.
guy's running. And so another friend and I, we just went over and we're talking and encountering that person. And out of that encounter and that growing relationship, again, that kind of subject or I thou thing,
Mhm.
it just came to be where we have the resources that this man in Guatemala has created. We use some of those resources in our classes here. And then we have some folks in our church and larger community who give money to make it possible for folks to go to the ESL class in that town, which that costs, it's really nothing for us, but it's hugely prohibitive for most people down there to be
Right.
able to do that. And
Right.
speaking English will open so many doors, tragically, but it's concrete. Speak English, you get better jobs, and all that again, it just comes out of encounters, just being willing to engage with someone, to say hello, to listen, to ask questions, and then just to see what can come out of that encounter. So it is really cool.
Yeah.
I'm not even mindful of all that all the time.
Well, and it's really interesting to see how that relationship started up here and it flowed down there, and now it's flowing back up here, because and this isn't a a merciless pitch, but we do sell Placebo coffee, and I'm staring at one in my office right now that I'm waiting to give my friend, from when all of this goes over, but it we're opening up that opportunity for a whole lot of other people to experience what goes on down there, even through a cup of coffee, and how something as simple as a cup of coffee can connect us all.
Yeah.
And I'm constantly amazed at how all of these connective tissues just bring a wider world so much closer, and especially folks in Central America, because there's so much of this immigration issue going on, that we can humanize these people and their struggles, and really offer a different perspective of
Yeah.
of just wonderful people just trying to make their way in the world.
Well, and even knowing that whole mutual collaboration and relationship, it all grows out of this man, Pablo, who's a pastor here now, an American
Mhm.
citizen, but who had to come in the 80s and 90s, come illegally to America to try to make money to feed his children
Mhm.
because of the crash of the coffee market. And that through all of that, that's how it all happens.
Well, speaking of all of this connective tissue, You're you're really good at giving people their spiritual fix. And I know there's a joke between you and me. I call Sunday services my spiritual yoga, and I know you get a giggle out of that. But what are some really good tools and maybe thoughts that we could pass on to people right now to help get them through? And when everybody's sheltering in place and again feeling that isolation, how can we help each other through? And maybe some stuff that you're doing at the church to help people through as well.
It's a good question. I think it's changing every day. I think I've noticed that people are getting more anxious, which rightly so, because now it's becoming clear that it's going to be longer. It's not going to
Mhm.
be done early April, maybe
Mhm.
not even early May. I think people are getting frustrated. They're getting more and more scared, and that comes out as anger,
Mhm.
um, and can be kind of violent, verbally violent when people are talking. And it's hard to see past that. So maybe take a breath if you're in that encounter. Take a couple breaths, and maybe take another breath. Bite your tongue before you say something to be able to get at what's really going on. I think the challenge for me always is, if you ask someone how they're doing, you have to be willing to really hear it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
don't just say, "How are you doing?" and move on. If you're going to ask someone, "How are you doing?" really be ready to listen. And maybe even be more precise, like, "How are you doing today?" Not just "How are you doing?" but "How are you doing right now? How are you taking care of yourself? Who are you worried about? Um, what's going on with this or that specific?" I think those things can make a big difference. I think in terms of checking in with your neighbors, maybe. I know we have a couple neighbors that are elderly, and it's good just to check in, see if they need anything. You might be able to help people with just something you already have, and it might not seem like anything, but it could be humongous. It's also just, I think, calling people. I mean, everybody's probably online a lot. Probably a lot of people that are connected to Harness You and stuff, but some people aren't, and they're probably really alone and not used to being alone. And there's a difference between isolation and alone. And
Yeah.
people are feeling really isolated, but you don't have to be alone when you're isolated. And so you can pick up the phone and call someone. Could be anything like that, but it can make a big difference, I think, for people.
Well, it was interesting. I was over at Safeway doing my, quick grab something and get out before I get exposed to everybody. And I noticed while I was standing in line, the cashier was looking really kind of tired, and I just said, "Hey, how are you doing today?" And he looked at me, I mean, really like, "Why are you asking?" And I said, "No, seriously, I just want to say thank you for what you're doing. You're here every day. You're getting exposed to all this, and I just really want to say thank you." And
Yeah.
again, two little tiny words. Oh my God, you should have seen his face. He completely lit up. And I said, "Aren't people thanking you?" And he goes, "You're the only one that did that today." And I was like, "Oh my God, I'm going to get some more people over here and have them thank you." But it really was profound in that moment because they're just little things, but
Yeah.
man, they have such a huge impact. I mean, he literally watched me walk away like, "She asked me how I was doing." And I was like, wow, I can't believe people aren't doing this right now. So I really do, I really do agree with that. And, I noticed that in our church, and maybe this is a suggestion we could give for other people, you've set up some circles. And how does that work?
So well, the church is being organized with everyone, but just setting up a circle so there's one person who connects and reaches out
Mhm,
to a small group of people, 5 to 7 people, just to check in. A lot of
mhm,
them are elderly,
mhm.
and so just checking in and establishing a relationship, that kind of encounter, so that life can come out of that maybe, so that then if there is a need or a concern, things can come out of that. And so it's really easy for people to do. I know everyone's doing all these happy hours and family get-togethers, and that's the same thing. But it's good to know that people are looking out for you. It's good to look out for other people. It's good to be looked out for.
Mhm.
Um, it's important, all that. And I think that goes along with like what you were saying about the worker in the store. And I learned today that someone in our church who works for a big multinational chain hasn't had a day off in 10 days,
Oh, gee.
and they were asked for a day off and they were told no, they can't have time off, which is illegal. But some of it too, like I know when I'm in the stores, I just say thank you to the people, saying thank you for coming to work today. Knowing that I don't always have time to actually listen to them talk about how they're doing, but thank you for coming to work, because a lot of those people, they don't even have a choice,
Yeah.
or they do legally, but maybe they feel like they don't. And that can be that circle too, reaching out to your established relationships using Zoom or phone or FaceTime or whatever. But also even just making your own circles of the people um, you see when you do go out, or even if you have stores or pubs or cafes you usually go to, maybe still giving them business, because they're part of that's your circle too.
You mean
Checking
takeouts, right? Not going in there, just doing takeouts.
takeouts, because they're really depending on that and stuff
Yeah.
like that. And I think really about us taking care of one another and being community together, working and defending each other, working towards a common goal.
Yeah, that really about sums it up. So if just to reiterate, take a couple extra minutes, say thank you, be a little bit more present, be a little bit more patient. And, I know there's a group of young women that I mentor, and I've been reaching out to all of them just to say, hey, checking in. I really recommend that to do that with other people, just your coworkers. Just if you don't happen to see them on screen every day, reach out, make a email, do a text, send an emoji. It really is impactful.
Yeah, completely.
Well, any other words of wisdom that you would love to share with us today?
I am all out.
I cannot believe that. You're like an endless well. I just really want to thank you for reminding us what an encounter really is and what a community really is, and why we need to really persevere a little bit extra than maybe we normally would, and just to keep that community alive and making sure that, everybody feels like they're part of it, part of this, and together we'll all get through.
Yeah, we will get through it.
Yes,
Question is,
we
will we
will.
do it together or not? That's the thing. It's
Yeah,
up to
I'm
us.
going to go for together.
Me too. Me too.
Well, thank you so much. I really
Yeah.
appreciate you giving us some words of hope and wisdom and insight, and thank you for just being who you are.
Thanks for the conversation. It's
All
great
right.
fun.
You take care.
You too.